junior at Grand Canyon University. This is my slideshow on teaching the introduction of scientific revolution and enlightenment to you guys. I don't think you guys have started yet, or you guys are just starting it, so this is an introduction. What is the scientific revolution? Pretty much the scientific revolution was a period of time where modern ideology finally came to light. So to this time period, everyone was dependent on what the Catholic Church said and did was history. So whatever the Catholic Church said, that's what's fact, nothing else mattered. Then the scientific revolution happened. A few famous thinkers and scientific revolutionaries are Robert Boyle, Johannes Kepler, Nicholas Copernicus. I'm not saying the names correctly at all, but you guys get the hang of it. Francis Bacon, Galileo, and then Isaac Newton. Okay, so the main takeaway from the scientific revolution is that it's the first moment in history where we actually see modern science issues come to light and theology come to light. So, finally you can't just blame, we have a desk because of God. No, we have a desk because of wood, metal, plastic, pretty much. The first great thinker is Nicholas Copernicus. He's the first person to discover that Earth was not just a stationary in space, but rather it revolved around the sun. So he pretty much was like, okay, the universe isn't just consisted of just Earth. Earth has a universe pretty much. So everything revolves around the sun. There's more than one planet, and God isn't the sole creator of Earth. He developed the Copernican revolution and then published his findings. The revolution is pretty much the change in idea of blaming God for the earth, but rather blaming science for the earth. He did not really get a lot of good feedback from this from the church. The church actually wanted to have him excommunicated, which means to be pretty much kicked out from society, kicked out from church. And he actually waited to be published his findings till after his death. Next is Mr. Johannes Kepler. He kind of backed up Nicholas Copernicus. His contribution was the discovery of laws of planetary motion. So he actually discovered to a T in mathematical and science ideology on how the earth moves around the sun. Why we have day and night. You can't just blame the day it turns night because God decided to turn the lights off. No, it's because we're revolving around the sun. So the other side of the earth is rotating. He also found out how fast the planets are moving, and it depends on how far they are from the sun. And he also proved that planets that orbit around the sun can be mathematically calculated. Next is Francis Bacon. He created an ideology that rejected the reliance on authority and favored to developing one's worldview based on one's own concrete observation. So instead of just, going to the church saying, hey, what do you think about this? Instead, he kind of was like, he revolutionized that. He was like, okay, well, what do you see? What do you feel about that? And how do you think about this? That's actually very important.
Attention students, if you are a bus rider, please start heading over to Maple to catch the bus. Buses leave exactly at 12:40. Again, if you're a bus rider, please start heading over to Maple to ride the bus. Promptly, they will leave promptly at 12:40.
Perfect. As I was saying about Francis Bacon, this is actually a very important key because we get into the Enlightenment later on in the slide. You'll see that it's actually dangerous but also revolutionary that anybody challenges against the church. These people were just lucky that they didn't get their heads chopped off or something because they had too much support from the communities and from certain aspects of Protestantism. So Calvinists, Lutheranism, if you were a supporter of that church, you really didn't care what the Catholics had to say anymore in that sense. He also developed a scientific method, which is very important to the scientific revolution. So all those science fair projects you're doing, finding hypotheses, doing research, stuff like that, he developed that. He's the reason why we have science fair projects in a way. But he was a real big advocate, not necessarily against the church, but against that they were withholding information and withholding people's individual opinions against the church. Next is Galileo. He promoted experimental physics and observational astronomy by discovering more about inertia and discovering new moons and planetary laws that challenge the teachings of the Catholic Church. He created De Monto, which is a pamphlet describing the moving arms of a balance could be used to model for treating all problems of natural motion. So he's taken a more scientific approach on why things happen the way they do in nature, in everyday life, rather than simply just blaming it on the Bible or blaming it or allowing a priest to explain it to you based off their religious background and knowledge. He defended and supported many ideas of motion, multiple planetary discoveries, and then strength of materials. He was actually forced to renounce and recant his scientific observations and presentations due to the Roman Inquisition. And Inquisition is pretty much the Catholic Church coming on and saying, who's not really one of us, and then we're going to discipline you. Any questions so far revolving around any of the scientific famous people we talked about? No. Next is Robert Boyle. He was an Englishman. He's known as the father of modern chemistry. So he's the reason why we have a headache in one of our periods every day in high school. He's supported corpuscularianism, which is over astrologian and particular views of the world. Pretty much, instead of blaming earth, wind, and fire and the four elements, and salt and sulfur and mercury, he supported in reality and change in terms of particles and in their motion. So just once again, taking on a scientific approach. And at the end of the day, the scientific revolution is the point in time where people are coming out to challenge the church and their views. Very important. And then finally, I have Mr. Isaac Newton. Many of you guys he's probably one of the most famous contributors to the scientific revolution, at least that we're all familiar with. He's famous for Newton's 3 laws of physics. He's famous for the discovery of inertia, and then he's famous for many of the popular scientific terms, such as F equals ma. And then also he's responsible for the 3rd law, which is any action has an equal or opposite reaction. And he's very important because his ideas were explosive, or his ideas were very controversial to the time period. So it's he kind of made room for a lot of scientific later inventions that would push us out of the pretty much ancient world into a more modern world. Now that's going to end the scientific revolution. Any questions about the scientific revolution so far? Or at least an introduction? No? Okay. Next is, what was the Enlightenment? So the Enlightenment is an era that initiated change in social ideology. So we went from science, physical, to now social and philosophical. So now your ideas, your thoughts on the way government works, the way social living works, social hierarchies, etc. Famous thinkers include John Locke, Frederick the Great, Voltaire, Rousseau, and then Thomas Paine. John Locke, he was known as the catalyst or the main influence of the Enlightenment thinkers. One of his famous contributions to the Enlightenment was the 2 Treatises of Government, which is developing the idea of a representative government. So up to this time period, well, a little bit prior, but most of the governments of the known world were monarchies, kings, queens, the Pope at the top, if that kingdom was still aligned with the Catholic Church. And if they weren't, then it was the kings, queens, priests, and stuff like that. Mr. John Locke went ahead and actually flipped that on its head and said maybe we should start thinking about democracy, or start thinking about a republic with parliaments or with senates, stuff like that. He believed that men are free and equal by nature, against claims that, he was against claims that God had made all people naturally subject to a monarch. So he hated monarchy, and he wanted to really push for a representative government by the people. Next is Voltaire. He was one of the biggest advocates against the church. he advocated for freedom of religion. So he wanted, it's one of our main amendment rights as Americans is the freedom of religion. A lot of these Enlightenment thinkers played a huge impact and role on the way the American government develops today. He also expressed the need for separation of church and state. That's why we don't say a prayer every day in class in a public school, because we want to separate between church, state, education, church, stuff like that. You guys should have that right to pray in the way you want, and this is what pretty much Voltaire believed in, which is very controversial in that time period, because it's like saying, going against the Catholic Church, it's like saying, I don't think you guys are right necessarily on forcing your religion on people. He also wrote a famous science fiction called Micromegas, which is a story about aliens coming down and pretty much judging us on the way we run things here. Next is Frederick the Great. He transformed Prussia into a strong European superpower. Kind of ironic though, because he was actually a really great, not necessarily monarchist, but he really wanted to help people protect their rights, individual rights, and protect their way of speech. He allowed people to support their individuality and support their speech against the government or how they should run. He was very closely aligned with Voltaire. He actually supported him financially, and he supported a lot of his ideology until they had a fallout. And he created a strong Prussian military, which ended up winning the 7 Years' War. And he created a Prussia to become a European superpower. Next is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He was a thinker who published ideas of freedom for all people from society. He created the social contract. So pretty much a social contract is, we have that here in the United States today, where it's like, I'm letting the executive branch, the president, the Senate, pretty much govern me, put laws onto me, and in return I expect them to provide services such as welfare, my social security, my police, fire department, a court to live in. If they break that social contract, or if we break it, then government cannot function, pretty much. This is what he believed in. This is the key and foundations to many democratic and republic societies today. He provided ideas in support of a direct democracy, with all citizens having direct influence on government functions. It's not really that good of a big of a deal. Well, it is, but it's not that great of an idea, because saying that each and every one of us should have a say in the functioning of our government, nothing would get done. This is why we see democracy in Athens and Greek fail, because Athens had a direct democracy, and having every single person vote on every single little thing, things would take too long to get done, and it would just cause chaos. Ideas inspired, and he also inspired leaders of the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, later on, you'll see that those ideas kind of worked against them, because they kind of made them pretty much misconfigured a lot of the way they ran the French government after the revolution was successful. Next we have Thomas Paine. He became a founding father of the United States of America, and he contributed heavily to the ideas of freedom and liberty. He wrote Common Sense, which is a huge deal in the forms of why we decided to rebel against Great Britain and decided that we needed to be an individual nation. He wrote The Rights of Man, which was a document expressing support for revolution. However, he didn't support the execution of King Louis XVI after the French Revolution, because he wasn't a man that supported violence. He wanted to support, freedom. He wanted to pull away from the monarchists and develop republics and democracies. However, he wanted to do it in a way that benefited all people. And in order to do that, you have to have a peaceful change of power. What say you? Let's go ahead and talk in some groups for a little bit. What did you see today that resembles the Enlightenment? Focus on the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. What were the main roles in those? What were the main points? What was the main theme of all of the artists and all of the thinkers together? So we'll go ahead and discuss in a group for a couple minutes, and I'll get back to you in a minute. You can go ahead and answer one question. Cool. Just around you guys.
First, it's obvious that the scientific revolution church and yeah, like that's
you explained the people. You explained the people, but what like sparked the people to question the authority of the church?
That's a good question.
Thanks.
I'll answer right now.
Okay.
We're done.
Attention bus riders, please make your way to the buses. They will be leaving in 10 minutes. And there is no late bus today, so please make your way to the bus area now. Again, bus
Thank you for
riders,
coming. I
please make
appreciate
your
it.
way to the bus area. Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, let's get back together. All right, so questions. What did somebody see that happened with the alignment? How is the alignment still in effect today? Anybody? Anybody got an answer? No. What's
So
up?
we still see it today, like with the American government, like you said, how there's like separation of church and state, and like education in church, so they don't force religion on us.
Cool. And like I said, not just religion, but necessarily, we see it, we're not ruled by a king. We have 3 branches of government. We have the president, Senate, and we have the judicial branch. And that's all came from, they might not have, those direct thoughts might not have came exactly from the Enlightenment, but the inspiration for those thoughts came from the Enlightenment. What do all these contributions, both during the Enlightenment and scientific revolution, have in common? So what's one thing they have in common? All of them. Anybody? Yeah.
Kind of adding on to the third question as well, that both the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, along with the contributors, they all had one main key factor in which they all rebelled against the monarchy and rebelled against the church, and wanted to spread freedom of thought in terms of other opinions.
That's a great point. So yeah, so pretty much what they all did was, like you said, they not necessarily rebel is a good word. They rebelled against their monarchies because they wanted, they encouraged rebellion pretty much. They encouraged the citizens to rebel against their governments to form a more democratic system. They didn't want to get rid of government completely. They just wanted a more democratic or republic form of government. The Catholic Church is starting to lose influence at this point. They were known as pretty much the global superpower of the time, and now many other countries are becoming superpowers that challenge their ideas with the Enlightenment, which we'll see later on in history. And then pretty much the key takeaways, this is an introduction, so I hope you guys were introduced. You had an earlier question, Scarlett?
Yeah. So you mentioned the people and what they did in terms of the alignment, but what sparked question in the authority of the church? Like, was there a specific event or person?
Well, prior to this, the scientific revolution, we can see the Reformation is a key point in the, when Martin Luther separated from the church and was excommunicated, we can see that he kind of encouraged with his 95 Theses that, and made it public that it's okay to challenge the church, yeah, I might get excommunicated, but there's now other Christianity religions in a way that we can join to still be Christian, but it's okay to say, I don't agree with the church. And I believe with the Reformation, we can see that the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution sprout from that, because now people are getting the motivation and the confidence to rebel against the church and against their ideologies and thinking. All right, any other questions regarding the introduction? No? Okay, well, I appreciate all of you guys being here. Thank you so much for helping my project, and you guys have a good day, okay? Cool.